Most of my good road stories revolve around me getting fired. Billy Joe fired me 10 times.
I'm sorry to laugh about that, but
It's pretty funny because he kept hiring me back. You know, we would get off a tour and say, "I'm gonna let you go." And I'd go a couple weeks and I'd run out of money, and Billy called me back and say, "I'm gonna hire you back. I'm gonna give you $1,000 to come back." So I made an extra $10,000 just getting hired and fired. But we would get people in the band, and he would fire them, and we'd be on the way home. They'd be crying, this and that. I'm driving along. They're giving me their hard luck story and this and that. I said, "Man, don't even talk to me till you've been fired at least 3 times, because then we could talk." He was a very eclectic person. He liked to change his band a lot, and he loved everybody that played with him. He just wanted to change, but it seemed like he always gravitated back towards me. I told him, I said, "Man, you can fire me as many times as you want, Billy. Just make sure you keep hiring me back." You know, he was like anybody else. He'd have his ups and had his downs and stuff. So, really, to travel along with Billy, or I would imagine anybody, you would have to be resilient on that front. You know, because getting fired is always in the basket. You know, it's always a possibility for anybody. We were in a van most of the time. We had a tour bus. Sporadically, we would rent a tour bus and go on tour. But I got a cool story about getting fired. Not getting fired, but it's kind of based around that. We were in California. We were in California on a tour, and we had played someplace down in, I think, San Diego, and we stayed there, and Billy had been given this 1959 Gibson Jumbo by a fan. So he was carrying it around with him, taking it everywhere he went. He wouldn't get very far from this thing at all. Well, we leave the hotel, and we get to the next gig up in Sacramento. I think we were playing a playhouse up there. And we start unloading. I said, "Billy, where's your guitar? You know, we got to set your guitar up," because he'd been playing it. And we look around, we can't find it, can't find it, can't find it. And Billy, he goes, "Man, I think I left that guitar behind the door in San Diego, in the hotel." So I called the hotel. Of course, they're closed at this point. Not closed, but it's later, and their staff is down to just like one person. So I call, and the lady picks it up, and she says, "Well, I don't know anything about a guitar." I said, "No, ma'am, this is a very important guitar. This is, you know, the 1959 blah 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 blah." And she says, "Well, I'll call my staff and we'll take a look around for it." And I hang up and tell Billy that, and his face gets red. He goes, "Jeremy, if you don't get that guitar back," I was his road manager. So a lot of these things fell into my plate. Road manager, driver. He goes, "Jeremy, if you don't get that guitar back, I'm going to quit." So I sat there for a minute. I thought, "Oh man, I really got to get this guitar back." And then it kind of dawned on me, "Quit what?" I said, "What do you mean you're going to quit, Billy?" And I said, "You're going to quit yourself?" And he sits there for a little bit. He's thumbing through his phone. He starts laughing. He starts laughing. He says, "No, I'm not going to quit myself. We just need to get that thing back." And so the whole way back, he was making jokes. "If I don't get this, I'm going to quit. If I don't get this, I'm going to quit." And he would not stop with that. But it was hilarious because there's just some of the things that would fall out of his mouth were just so colorful. He just had that in him. And you couldn't help but love the guy. You couldn't help forgive him if he got like that way, you know, with you. We went out on tour. We had just a few dates to do. And we played Kansas City first. And after the gig, he fired the drummer. Put him on a plane, sent him home. After the next gig, we played, I think we played in St. Louis. But he fired the bass player, put him on a bus, which just left me and Billy. So our next gig was in Baton Rouge at the Workplay Theater. So on the way down there, I'm calling there and saying, "Hey, you know, we're coming in as a 2-piece." Because we booked it as a band. So we're coming in as a 2-piece. And he said, "It's going to be okay?" I said, "Yes, everything's going to be all right. It's just going to be me and Billy. We're used to doing this. We've done this a lot. It's going to be a good show." And we show up down there, do the show, and The next morning we get up, and the show went great. We had a standing ovation, packed house, you know. And the next morning we get up and we start heading towards Tampa. We're gonna get on this cruise. And Billy says, "I'm gonna pay you 20 grand to go be on this thing, and I'm gonna make 20 grand. We're gonna kick butt on this thing. We're gonna sell some merch. We're gonna do all this." And we get about just down in the panhandle just a little bit, and Billy starts acting weird. Starts acting real weird. So I'm kind of keeping it quiet, and I'm kind of keeping it quiet. So what he does is he says, "Well, let's just turn around and go home." I said, "Billy, we got to go down here and do this. I wanted that $20,000. I said, "We got to go down here and play this gig." He says, "No, I don't want to do the cruise. I don't want to go get on that boat. My grandmother told me I was going to die on the water, and I'm not doing it." So we turned around, and on the way, he said, "Let's just go to Waco." So we turned around in Florida and headed back to Waco. And about halfway back, he says, "I'm just going to let you go too." I said, "Okay, Billy." At that point, I was tired of it. I've been fired so many times. I said, "Whatever, man." I said, "If you want to put me on a plane and you drive this thing home, I'm good with that, you know." And of course, we came on back and wash, rinse, and repeat. We're back on the road about a month later. Not the same band, but me and him and two other guys. But that was just par for the course, man. If you didn't have the nut, you could not play with Billy. And I just happened to have it. I enjoyed traveling in a van with him more than I did the bus. Because in the van, it's like a camaraderie. We're like a gang on the road. Everybody's on top of each other. If you enjoy the people that you play with, that's absolutely the best way to go. And we were a dynamic group, and we liked each other. We spent time together. We would plan things and go do things together. So when we were on a bus, it wasn't like that. Billy would go to the back of the bus, and then everybody would climb in their bunks and talk home, whatever, and do whatever. There's very little communal feeling to it. So I always enjoyed the van. Some guys enjoy a bus. I enjoyed hanging out and going down the road with my friend Billy. That was the most important thing, you know. That was the most important thing to me, was spending time with Billy. It's kind of surreal, because looking back now, I can't believe how lucky I was. Eddie came out a lot, and he would sit in and jam with us, and we'd talk, and he was planning on doing a record with us. And pretty soon he started bringing his dad down, and his dad would come in and I guess do his thing in the club and watch us a little bit and get up and jam a couple of songs. And so we became close like that. And he eventually hired our band years later after Eddie passed. And that's how I ended up on the road with him.
When Eddie would come out and play with you guys, did he play through an amp that was already there?
He would play through my amp, and it was a Fender Princeton. And it was the funniest thing, because Eddie was one of those guys that he would just walk up to the Fender amp and roll all the knobs, and that was his sound. And he walked up and did that. We didn't know I had that hooked up to a 1,000-watt power amp and a 412 cabinet. I said, whoa, this is just my preamp. I said, my power's coming from here. He goes, "Oh, well, you're doing that wrong. You're doing it wrong." So, but it worked for me, and that's what he would usually play through. He would have to kind of tweak that amp a little bit, but he was an incredible player. One time he got up and he played a 20-minute version of Rocky Mountain Way. And there was not a dry eye in the house after that. I mean, he just rung. I felt like he played every lick he knew. And that was the way Eddie was, especially like if he wasn't on stage with Billy and wasn't like in the confines of Billy's writing, that guy could play. So I was real attracted to that kind of music, and that's really what kind of forged my country music sensibilities, was basically just meeting Eddie. He would turn them all to 10. The volume, master volume. It was a little Princeton, but he would take the master volume, just basically everything on there, turn it all the way up, the presence, and
Would he plug straight in?
he plugged straight in. I had this Dan Electro Daddy-O pedal. He liked it. He's like, "Man, I like that pedal." I was like, they're only like $100. So he gave me $100 and took it. And it wasn't 100, it was like 150. I let him have it. I was like, well, you know, that's cool. So I went eventually and got me another one. But so we were guitar nerds, man. We talked about amps and this and that, and Billy showed me a lot of his gear after he passed, and there was Mesa Boogies, there was a Fender Twin, there was some small combo amps and things like that, just for recording or for whatever, sitting around. And but he really liked that Mesa Boogie. That was his, according to Billy, that was his baby. Especially around the time he passed, that was basically like his wife, you know. He would turn his amplifier back towards the wall. It's a common trick, especially in rock and roll, but they turn your amplifier towards the wall so it's not blasting right at you. And he would use the amplifier to reverberate off the room so it makes a room sound like it's supposed to sound. And he could play as loud as he wanted to, and that amp was just hot, you know, and that was Eddie's sound. Yeah. After Eddie passed, Billy would come in every once in a while and come see us and sit in and play a few songs. I believe we were doing Georgia on a Fast Train one night, and Billy was up there playing with us. And you have to understand, I didn't know who Billy was when I started playing country. I had no idea. And so him coming in was just like it would have been anybody coming in. You know, there's a lot of songwriters in Texas. I just wasn't really acute to what he was. He would come in and play these sets with us, and they would get longer and longer. And at one point, Billy looked over at me and said, "You're my favorite living guitar player." And my hair stood up. Wow. And I was like, I can't believe he just said that to me. And it was pretty much just to me, which is enough, you know. But then he turned around and went around the bar and told everybody there. So, and unknown to me, so I'm breaking down that night, and I'm getting ready and packing my stuff up to go home. And people keep coming up to me and say, "Man, you're Billy Joe's next guitar player. You're Billy Joe's next guitar player." I'm like, what are they talking about? You know, I didn't believe it. And eventually, he did hire me. We were out on the road one time, and we were just talking. And I said, "Billy," I said, why'd you pick me? And he says, "Well, I didn't. Eddie did." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "They played with you all one night." And he said, he came home and he said, "Dad, if anything ever happens to me, go get that kid in my hand. He can do what I do." And so years later, that's what happened.
Do you remember the first official gig that you did with Billy Joe?
I do. We played at Love and War up in Dallas somewhere. It was a decent crowd. I was using chorus at the time on my amp, and it was just kind of part of my sound. And we get up, we play about 2 songs, and Billy walks over to me and says, "Did you turn off that skating rink music?" And I said, "What is he talking about?" He said, "I don't know. It sounds like we're in a skating rink." And I looked over my amp, and I didn't use a lot of pedals and everything. I thought, wow, maybe he's talking about that chorus. And I got to thinking about those old skate, you know, Billy's from a different time when that's what the music they played. They'd have somebody on an organ and had some chorus and, you know, this and that. And so it kind of clicked on me. I said, well, okay, let me turn this chorus off. And from there on, it was smooth sailing. We were doing, you know, 1,000-seaters in small places, and every once in a while we'd get a big show on a festival or about like somebody would expect. Billy wasn't a household name, and he would take gigs like most people would take. Billy had a childlike mind, so going down the road was a lot like going around with a bunch of guys my age or younger. You know how there's immaturity on the road. You know, there's jokes, there's things like that, and it was very much the same, all but Hemingway laying in the bunk telling the jokes. So you know they were good jokes, but he would write songs going down the road, and just kind of like everybody else does. It's just he was great at it. I used to pinch myself and go, man, I cannot believe I'm in this van. He did. He told me that story a lot. And one thing I'd like to iterate is that what you saw on stage of Billy was nothing fake. It wasn't contrived. It wasn't thought out. If we got in the van, the show continued. The stories continued the same way, except we would get the long version. We would get the 12-hour version of whatever story he was telling on stage. And it would go from Atlanta to Nashville or wherever we were going, and he would tell stories the whole time. We would get the long versions of those. And that was a joy to hear, because everybody in the band always felt lucky, because we got to hear the actual nuances and everything that he would stretch those stories out. It's amazing how long he could go. Billy said they were living in Nashville, and they were at a low point, and some other stuff that causes you to question your own existence. And he said he finally went up to this altar, or went up to this rock up on this cliff, and he was ready to jump off. He figured he'd messed his life up. He'd drugged, he'd cheated, he'd done all this and everything that had gone on with him and his wife and his family, the basic stuff that everybody goes through. And he climbed up the top of that rock, and he was going to jump off. Next thing he knew, he was turning around facing that rock, and it was like an altar, and he was praying. He said he doesn't know what happened to him. He said, but something came over him, and he started walking down that path back to his truck, and he started singing that song, "I'm Just an Old Chunk of Coal." He said it just fell on him right then, and that was how he healed from whatever it was he was going through at the time.
I've been to that spot, and it's the most beautiful place in Tennessee. The Harpeth River runs under it, and there is this very large rock that's flat on the top, and it's obvious this is the rock.
That's where it was. I've never been there.
I'll show you a picture when we're done here.
I'd love to see that.
Me and my dog there, but
it was after a gig one night, and Billy and I were traveling home. I think we played down at Lukenbach, and it was getting kind of late. And he says, "Man, let's lay down for the night." I said, "Okay, Billy, let's find us." I said, "Johnson City's right up here, and we'll pull in here and grab us a hotel." When we go up, we pull in there, and Billy goes in. I go in behind him, and Billy says, "We need 2 rooms for the night." And the guy says, "Well, I've only got 1." I said, "Billy, why don't you take this? I'll sleep in the van, and we'll get up in the morning and go on home." He says, "No." He said, "Thanks anyway." And we get back in the van and start taking off. And it's about 2:00. It's late. Billy needs to lay down. And it's a long way home. I said, "Billy, why don't you take that room, get some sleep?" I said, I usually sit up half the night anyway. By the time it's time to go home, we'll go home. I'll be fine. I'm used to that. Billy says, "All right, if you're sure." So we head back to that hotel. We go back in, and as soon as we walk in, he says, "Hey, we just had another room open up. It's our suite. There's 2 bedrooms, 2 TVs, 2 bathrooms. It's kind of our nicest one." We had a cancellation. The guy just called and said he's not going to be coming. We stood there for a second. He said, and Billy said, "I'll take that cheap room. Give my driver here the penthouse suite." That's how Billy was. He would put you first. And I'll tell you what, man, every time I had an encounter with Billy like that, I always came out the victor. He made sure that you did. He made sure that you didn't feel like he was being rock starred or diminished or anything like that. We were playing a concert one night in a kind of a small bar, pretty good packed up crowd. We're playing our songs. Billy's playing our set. And this guy comes up to the stage. And he's been drinking, and he says, "Play some Haggard." Merle Haggard had just passed away, and it was understandable. And the place fell silent. And Billy stood there, and he looked at him. He said, "I write my own songs." And that guy, you could see his shoulders just kind of drop down. He kind of walked away from the stage, and he started to make his way towards the door. And right before he got out the door, I figured he got embarrassed and was walking out. Right before he got out that door, Billy started singing "Ramblin' Fever" a cappella, straight to him. All of it. That right there shows you Billy Joe's character. He wasn't going to let that guy leave. He was going to give him what he wanted. And he put so much before himself to do that, And so in that moment, that really kind of shows you the character of Billy Joe. He would maybe tell you, "Hey, I don't feel like doing that. I don't feel like doing that." You can turn around and do it. One of my very first gigs, we played with Billy. He called us. I joined with another band, and he called us up and said, "I got a gig this weekend if y'all want to go." And they said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "Well, it's in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. He said, but the van's in the shop. We're going to have to take Eddie's old brown van, which is a small van. We agreed to it. So we all jump in this van. And well, it's not easy to get 4 guys and all their equipment in a small van like that. And it's in the heat of the summertime also. And this van has no air conditioner. So off we take for Muscle Shoals, Alabama, out of Waco. We get about to Dallas, and Billy says, I got to lay down. Well, the only place to lay down is on top of these amps in the back of this, where I've been laying pretty much the whole time. The sun is beating on the roof, and you can really feel it on your back, you know. And so there we are. We're tearing down the road. It's a beautiful day. And Billy laid up there on that thing next to me, cracking jokes the whole way there. He actually laid up there the entire way and let the other 2 guys sit in the front. And we sat up there, and it was probably the funnest trip. It wasn't very comfortable, but it was fun. And I always bring that up when somebody says, you know, oh, this gig was harder, that gig was harder, it's going to be difficult to do this. I always think about Billy riding on top of that equipment. Billy Joe Shaver riding on top of that equipment right next to me, just cracking jokes all the way out there. And that's another thing that kind of shows you the character of him. He was a old man, but inside he was a little kid. Common ground with him, you know. I'm a little immature too. I think things are funny. In my brain, I feel like I'm 15 still, you know. I'm still the same guy. And I think Billy was too. So I think that's where we kind of connected. But he was like a dad to me, man. You know, and that we'd have ups and downs, back and forth. He had lost Eddie, and I'd lost my dad about the same time. So we just kind of got together and just continued, man. I was just glad he was able to stay on the road. And there was another time Billy and I were going down the road, and it was a day off, and we were just kind of taking our time to go home, and we were kind of bantering back and forth. And I said something he kind of agreed with, and he made the remark, Jeremy, that's why you're my guitar player. I sat there for a little while, and I was driving. I said, no, Billy, that's why you're my singer. And it took a couple of minutes, and he finally got it, and he started laughing. Oh, okay, I'm your singer. And he said, that's funny. That's funny. I said, I know. I was just kind of messing with him. And then he said, well, I sure am glad to be your singer. And I thank you, Billy. I said, I'm glad to be your guitar player. And there was a tone to it. And he kept saying that all the way home. And we laughed and laughed and laughed. And when I got home, he dropped me off. He texted me. He said, you're fired. He hired me back, but...
What kind of places would you eat on the road?
Billy ate at Cracker Barrel. If he saw a Cracker Barrel, that's where we were eating. I think I've had everything on the menu at this point.
Did he care about guitars at all?
He did. He was real funny about his own guitar. He would make sure that it went to his hotel room with him every night. If he got up to his hotel room and he decided, well, I want to write, then he had his guitar with him. Or if he got up there and noticed that he didn't bring his guitar up, he would call me. Could bring my guitar to me. I'd bring it up there. But Billy only had a couple fingers missing, and it was hard for him to restring. So he would have me come up to his room and restring for him almost every night. If he was going to be playing, he would want a brand new set of strings on there, and he used those little light strings. They were pretty easy to set up, but I always enjoyed going up and stringing up his guitar. I always felt lucky to be able to do that. I think the reason he used those is because they're smaller, they're more compact. A lot of your older riders, people that have been, a lot of your older riders, people that have been playing for a long time and writing for a long time, they don't need much. They just need the very basic stuff, and that's kind of what that thing was to him. He didn't really play all through the show. He would just kind of get the song started, and he'd set it down. So a small guitar like that's perfect for that. He didn't have to go take the big old thing off and set it back down. It was really easy for him. I think that's why he gravitated towards them. But I play a 3/4 now, and I love it because it sounds different than a jumbo. It sticks out. So if I'm playing in a group with a bunch of jumbo guitars, my leads will stick out because they have a different timbre than a jumbo sound. So I can see why he would want a smaller one. He had his reasons, I got my reasons, you know. I'll tell you something I never got used to was listening to Billy Joe write songs. He would be back in the back of the van, and I'm driving. He would write a song, and he'd come up and just sing part of it in my ear. Imagine that. Nobody's ever heard this before, and it's good. It makes your hair stand up. And he would develop those songs and basically just come up there, what do you think of that? What do you think of this? And of course, Billy Joe could do no wrong, but he would make those songs better and better and better. And it was always interesting. He was a wordsmith. He would change words out, and he would say, this word here works better. This word here makes me feel this. So every line was full of intention and innocence. He would try to he said, I don't want this to make it feel like this. I don't want to he was very, very strict about what words he used. And I think that's important. There's a lot of writers out there, and there's a lot of good writers. And we all run into them, and they all play music for us that makes us feel something. But I'll tell you when I got it. We were at Floribama, which is a little bar that lays on the line of Florida and Alabama on the coast. There's a club there. And Billy had a friend named Strychnine that lives in a trailer across the way. And Strychnine used to play keyboards for the Leonard Skinner boys back when they were the 1%. And so he's tush hog. So we go over and visit with him, and we're all sitting around. He says, well, let's just do a guitar pull. And there's a few other folks over there, and they're passing the guitar around, playing this and drinking beer and having a good time. At some point, they give Billy the guitar. He sits there, and it's quiet. Everybody's quiet, listening to him. And Billy begins to play the song that he just wrote. There's no fool like an old fool. I'm living proof of that. And as he starts developing the song, like, I got it. I understood Billy. The guitar pull after he finished that song was over. Billy shut him down. There was nobody going to play their song after that, after what he just did. It was something about the song, the music, Billy's voice, that night on the beach, it just hit you, And I think when people enjoyed Billy Joe's music, everybody has that moment. That time, that when he reaches them, and then from then on, it's part of you. And that was probably my favorite moment, was when I finally understood who he was. And the colors came up, and it was like a big box of 24 crayons.
Who were the writers that he would talk about, like really digging and respecting?
He really talked about two people. And Billy Joe was a young man when Jimmy Rogers was popular. And Jimmy Rogers was one of his favorites, the singing brakeman. He talked about Jimmy Rogers almost constantly, and Hank Williams. He saw Hank Williams when he was a child, and man, he told that story his whole life.
Tell me the story of seeing Hank Williams.
Well, Billy's grandmother worked at a place, and I believe that's where he played. And Hank Williams came through, and he was going to do a concert. And Billy said he went down to this place. It's called the Green Gables. He writes about it in other songs. Yeah. And went down to Green Gables to go see Hank Williams perform. And he had to walk down the tracks to get down there. It may not have been at that place, but he said he went in there, and he said he was the youngest kid in there and couldn't see over the people. So what he did was he went and shimmied up a pole. So, one of the poles that hold the building up, and he got up where he could see him. He said, there he was, Hank Williams. He said, I watched him. He said, I swear to God, he was looking right at me singing. He said, I don't know how he couldn't. There's a kid shimmying up a pole. Of course, your eyes are gonna gaze to it. He said, but I could feel him looking at me. I could feel him almost caring whether I fell or not. He said, he goes, man, I climbed down from there. And he said, I knew what I had to do. When you put a place like that into a song, your imagination can wander, and you kind of put your own vision of what the Green Gables is. And I think that's beautiful. But in truth, Green Gables was a small place. It probably wasn't even as big as this. And it's gone now. It's been torn down. But when I first saw it, I thought, this is Green Gables. It's really nothing but a slab, and it looks about maybe a half-acre lot. I was like, where'd they park? Where'd they do this? And it's a special place to me, you know, and I never went there with Billy. I just know that that's part of his history. So I go down there every once in a while and sit and eat lunch and, you know, at the Green Gables. And it's really neat because it kind of feels like something that's just mine, you know, which a lot of Billy's music can seem like that to every one of his fans, you know. And so Green Gables is a legend now. He was always treated like an icon. There were very few places that treated him with disrespect. He was always treated as the icon that I saw him as by most of the people that hired him. The people that came to see us were people who liked real music, real people that actually loved Billy Joe. There was nothing fake about them either. I always enjoyed playing for them and talking to them because they were real people. And there was always somebody there that didn't know who Billy Joe was at the beginning of the show. And they would come up afterwards and go, man, that was like a religious experience, just seeing him play. And he would make fans like that. So he would get his thing was he would get those people that are sitting around that their wife brought them up there and they didn't really want to come. They didn't get it. They didn't understand Billy Joe. He said, my job is to get those arms uncrossed. He said, I'm singing to that guy tonight. And he would do that. And he was good at it. We were playing the Troubadour in LA one night, and Norm shows up and hops up on stage and starts telling jokes. And they hung out all that day, and then that's really what led to him being on that TV show. But Norm was a nice guy, and he loved Billy. I mean, those two, it was almost like he was looking at his grandfather or his dad or somebody that he was supposed to be close to, you know.
I've read multiple quotes of Norm Macdonald saying Billy Joe Shaver is the greatest songwriter alive.
Absolutely.
And he really seemed to believe that. And were there other examples of famous people that would show up at shows that?
Billy had an eclectic group of people, but it always surprised me how many famous people knew who he was. We would be standing. I'd be standing there, and there's no telling who would walk up. Dan Rather walked up one time during a drum solo and said, "Can I talk to Billy?" I said, "You're Dan Rather. You can talk to whoever you want to." But there was always. I mean, he was an artist. You know, people say, well, he wasn't really well known. He was in his industry. You know, it's by his peers. They knew who he was and they respected him. And a lot of artists drew their inspiration from Billy.
Did he ever talk about Waylon at all?
He did talk about Waylon a little bit. He loved Waylon. They were friends like anybody else, but and you know, they had their issues like anybody else does, but he loved Waylon. And I didn't get to meet Waylon. He had passed away before. I think he passed in 2002, and I joined in 2005, and so I didn't get to meet him. You didn't get to meet Cash, but all the rest of them I did. He never listened to other writers because he didn't want someone to come along and say, "Well, you got that from me." People would give us CDs and things like that, and he'd say, "Don't listen to that in the van. Don't listen to it in here. I don't want to hear it because if they think that I heard their song and wrote something like that, they'll come after me. They'll sue me, you know." So he had a real hands-off. There was no radio played in the van. We would do it on our headphones and stuff like that. But if it was being played on that radio, it was a Billy Joe Shaver song, which was okay with me.
People don't understand that, but that's a real thing, and people have to worry about that.
Well, and when you're somebody like Billy, I used to think he was paranoid, and but when you're somebody like Billy, you have to be careful, especially in areas that have a big music presence, because people, if they find out he's there, will go listen to his hotel room door and this and that to see what he's writing. And I didn't believe him, but it's true. It's true.
Did they ever follow him to his house?
No, I wouldn't let anybody follow him to his house. We didn't play in Waco a lot, and he told me, he said, "Don't ever play your hometown." He said, they'll follow you home. So I'm glad you brought that up.
There's wisdom there.
There is wisdom. And to this day, I don't play my hometown. I think that's some of the best advice that I ever got. Go home to live, you know. Go play. Go out somewhere and play.
Familiarity breeds contempt.
Well, they see you at the grocery store. They see you at the gas station. They see you here. They see you there at the library, at the post office. They just think, well, that's just one of my buddies, and that's cool. It should stay like that. And he was friends with a lot of people in town, and he was open to talking and always spent time with anybody that if they walked up or said hello. But he was pretty adamant about getting out on the road. This is the music business. It's not the music. Stay home. We would do somewhere around 100 dates a year. He would take time off, so it would sometimes it wouldn't equal up to that. But he would try to play at least twice a week. When we were on tour, we were doing 3 nights. We were doing 3 nights on, 4 nights off, and so we went pretty steady until it got to be where it was too much for him, and he was starting his singing and his stamina was starting to kind of wear down. So we curled it back. I called his booking agency and I said, man, we've got to cull this down. We're having to cancel gigs, and I know that doesn't look good for y'all, so let's just kind of pull it back a little bit and just let him enjoy the rest of his life, That's what we did. He would cancel if he was tired or if he didn't feel like he was up to the performance. He didn't want to give a half-cocked performance. It wasn't always welcome, but they understood, and he would take care of the business and we would rebook and everything. But it just became a part of, traveling with an older songwriter that has high standards. He didn't want to go out and sound bad. Billy kind of shied away from success. He didn't want to be successful. He wanted to be hungry. He wanted to write. That's who he was. He told me several times, he said, man, if I would have made millions of dollars back in the day, he said, I never would have wrote some of these songs. He said, so, he said, kind of staying on the back burner and having to work for it made me a better writer. So while he enjoyed those kind of things, he did shy away from people who were stars, because he didn't want to seem like he was trying to borrow from their fame or their fortune or anything like that. Billy Joe stood on his own. He didn't take any shit from anybody, but I didn't see him get into a whole lot of fights. The only time I ever saw him get into a fight was at South by Southwest, and I think it was 2007 or 2008. We were playing down there, and we were walking around checking bands out. This is back when they still had bands on the street, and we were watching a band, and our bass player, Nick, he kind of got into it, kind of got in a little shoving, pushing match with one of the other people there. The next thing you know, Nick is kind of going to throws with this guy. Billy Joe sees it, 67 years old, jumps in. My eyes are like saucers, so what do? I'm his caretaker. Not caretaker, but I'm his manager, road manager, and chief cook and bottle washer. So I pull Billy off, and Nick continues with this guy. And that's the only time I ever saw him get physically active. But there would be other times where, somebody would walk into, let's say, there was times when people would walk into our backstage area just to say hi to Billy. Billy would say hi, and if that person sat down on a couch or something like that, Billy had no reservations to tell him, hey man, why don't you take a hike? And you had to appreciate the man's honesty. I mean, that's the way he felt, and he relayed that to him, and the person picked it up and was almost like writing a song. I mean, it was beautiful. I was like, Billy, why'd you do that? He said, so he'd leave.
It's his personal space. It might be his only downtime of the day.
Well, he's getting ready for his show. He's trying to get his mind right. He's trying to get in that zone where he can go out and give a good show. And if somebody's sitting in there rattling off about this and rattling off about that, this is our quiet time. This is when we're preparing for battle,
This is the most shallow question I'll ask today. His belt buckle. Billy Joe had the best belt buckle ever at Round. Did he ever say where he got that at?
His wife made that for him. And it was made from a horse bridle. And don't know how, but she figured out a way for him to loop it through there. And that's the one he wore till the day he died.
I mean,
I think they buried him with it. He had that belt for a long time, and I believe he had another one made so that he wasn't having to mess that one up. And so I think he had 2 of those belts. But the one that you see is they're identical. And that was the only belt I ever saw him use.
There's a horse bridle.
It's a horse bridle.
Okay.
People would give Billy belt buckles. And I've got them all at my house because he would just give them right to me. Here, take this one, take this one, take this one. I can't use a belt buckle. So that's where those came from. They would just be random stuff. It would be something cool, something unique, but like a cowboy belt buckle, and then which he didn't like those because they would mess up the back of his guitar, and they didn't fit on his belt. So I got a whole box of them that he gave me over the years. I got one with John Wayne on it. When he started canceling strings of dates, like we would be out in California and we'd have a string of 5 or 6 dates to do. And we get about halfway through that, and he'd say, "Well, I'm just going to go home. I'm tired. I don't know what else to do. I'm tired. I can't do this." And at that point, I realized we were running him too hard. And like I told you earlier, I said I would rather Billy Joe be here than to be out on the road playing music and living my dream. I want Billy Joe to enjoy his later years. Billy had been having some issues. And was having some episodes where he was just unclear, and it did scare me. I'd go over to his house and help him clean. I'd go over and clean our van out. He was trying to keep me busy because we were on the road. And he'd pay me $1,000 to clean the van just to keep me some money in my pocket. And of course, I'd go over there. He wouldn't pay me. He would forget about it. I didn't hold him against any of that stuff against him. But that's kind of how he was taking care of me. I noticed that he was getting a little loose up there. It didn't seem like Billy. And one day I got a random message on Facebook, and it said, "Hey, this is so-and-so. I'm an EMT. And I just want to let you know, you don't know me, but I know you play for Billy, and I just wanted you to know and be aware that we just took Billy to the hospital. We just delivered him there. He's up there. He's had a stroke." And so I make a few phone calls, and I go up, and there's a couple of friends are already there that I've told. I said, I think he's there. Let's go check. Let's go make sure that this is what we think it is. And maybe it's not Billy Joe. And it was. Billy was he was unconscious, and he was hooked up to all the machines, and he was smiling. A smile I've never seen on Billy's face, just a pride. And I knew he was with Eddie already. And I sat there with him for a little while, and I watched the machines. I watched his breathing go in and out. He was on a breathing machine. And I knew that was it. I went over and kissed him on his head. And I told him, I said, "Thank you, Billy, for everything you've done for me." And I said, "Man," I said, "Go be with Eddie." And I walked out. And that was the last time I saw him. The next day, they pulled the plug on him. I didn't just lose my best friend. I lost my job, my confidant, and a little part of myself. it's kind of a haze. I was in shock for a few days, to be honest. It's one of the hardest funerals that I've ever had to go to. During the service, the graveside service, I was able to sing a little bit with a couple of other fellas, and it's just a daze. I was standing there, and they said, "Okay, here's the shovel. Let's put dirt on him," and I didn't want to. I really didn't, but I did. I grabbed that shovel and started putting dirt on my friend. I couldn't believe I was doing it, and I had some guitar picks. I usually keep some guitar picks on me in my pocket. I use these little yellow picks. And I had a handful of them, and I threw them in there, and we kept throwing dirt on, and it was a real hard day. I'm glad I got through it. A lot of people came down that I didn't expect to come down. There was fans from Ohio, fans from Indiana. We had people come in from Washington, and nobody famous came. I mean, I didn't see anybody famous. But all those people that he had touched with his music over the years almost every one of them were there. And I'd rather have that than anybody famous.